What if the person you buried long ago wasn't dead after all? Penelope stared at the decrypted name glowing on the screen. Andre Malik, last seen in Afghanistan 8 years ago. Declared Kier. She'd held his dog tags, attended a funeral. With no body, he'd been her partner, her shadow in the field. A man who understood codes without speaking, who covered her six when things got ugly and impossible. And now, his name had been smuggled into a dying signal. 6 seconds of raw, glitching audio sent from a surveillance drone that was supposedly untraceable, except it wasn't. She played the audio again, just 2 words, whispered and filtered through distortion. Penelope. Run. That voice, older, cracked, but undeniably his. The cold crawled up her spine. She'd buried a lot of ghosts, but Andre wasn't one of them anymore. She leaned back in her chair, eyes unfocused. Every instinct screamed this was bait. Trap. A ploy designed to reel her out of hiding, but it didn't matter. You don't ignore someone who saved your life twice, especially not when the world already thinks they're dead. Why do warriors walk into traps? Even when they know they're traps. She moved quickly. Within an hour, she'd pulled up old flight corridor maps, assessed NATO's restricted airspace logs, and isolated satellite blind spots over the Levant. None of it was official. She had no clearance for this, but no one was going to stop her. She typed a message to Dr. Vasquez. Family emergency. I'll be back in 72 hours. It wasn't a lie. Andre had once told her that family didn't mean blood. It meant who showed up when it counted. He had shown up for her once in the dark, when she bled out behind enemy lines and needed someone to carry her 5 kilometers under fire. She owed him the same. She slipped into the flight suit without the ceremonial calm she usually carried. There was no team watching, no applause, no confirmation sequence. Just her and the aircraft. She chose the older bird, not the prototype. An FA-18 she'd flown in combat. Familiar, fast, quiet enough to slip under too many radars if flown right. Inside the cockpit, she ran a startup checklist by muscle memory. Her voice was steady, but her pulse, it was thunder. And when the wheels lifted off the tarmac, she didn't feel like a Northwind test pilot. She felt like the woman she thought. She buried in a coffin beside Andre's name. The soldier, the ghost. What lives in the silence between mission and memory? By nightfall, she was high above the Mediterranean, banking wide toward blacked-out terrain. Her fuel levels were carefully managed. Refueling points pre-mapped in back channels, known only to NATO Shadow Air Ops teams. The flight was long. Long enough for Ghost to catch up. She remembered Andre's laugh. Low and cruel only to people who deserved it. The way he used to fix his scope 3 times, even when it was already perfect. How he never said goodbye. Only watch your 6. She had watched, and she'd seen the explosion that swallowed him whole, except something didn't feel right about that memory anymore. It had always been too clean, too final. Now she questioned everything. What did she find when she landed in a place no one would authorize? She touched down at an abandoned forward operating base nestled between 2 ridges in the Syrian highlands. It wasn't marked on any current map, but she knew it. She'd fought here the moment the engines went quiet. The desert silence returned. No wind, no wildlife, just the weight of heat and history. She stepped out, helmet under her arm, sidearm holstered, moving as if it was yesterday, not 8 years ago. Buildings half collapsed. Ration crates turned to rusted shells, but something felt watched. She scanned the area. Footprints, fresh, then a sharp sound, metal scraping. Behind the old cum tower, she moved fast, weapon drawn, breath controlled, nerves coiled. And then she saw him, dirty, older, beard flecked with white. Thin, but alive, Andre. He raised his hands, not in fear, just caution. I told you to run. Her weapon dropped to her side, slack with disbelief. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. He didn't smile. So are you. Why did? He disappeared, and why had he come back now? Inside what was once a tactical bunker, Andre poured 2 cups of water-rusty kettle, scavenged heat source. The silence between them said everything. Penelope leaned against a broken map table. How? Are you alive? He drank first, then said, they wanted a body, didn't care whose. Just needed the war to wrap up clean. So I gave it to them. She stared. They framed your death? He nodded. Not framed, buried. The mission went off script. Intel was wrong. We recovered data we weren't supposed to find about a weapons transfer through civilian corridors. Someone up the chain didn't like that. Her throat tightened. You've been hiding this whole time? Hiding? He laughed. Once bitter, no, surviving. Penelope's eyes narrowed. Why reach out now? He slid a datapad across the table. Because now they're building something worse. And your name's on the wrong list. She looked down. A satellite photo, a facility blueprint, coordinates, and a kill list. At the top, LT, call, Penelope Koslov. Why was she always the one who knew too much and said too little? She stood in the break room, back to the window, wiping down a countertop for the 100th time. The sun filtered in through the tall glass panes behind her, illuminating a room, full of murmurs, clinking mugs, and side glances that pretended not to notice her. But she noticed everything. 15 years of silence. 15 years of getting every supply order right without writing anything down. 15 years of remembering. The dietary quirks of engineers, doctors, test pilots, while serving their coffee without ever spilling a drop. And now, they were whispering. They weren't whispers meant to wound her, not yet. They were whispers born of confusion, of patterns finally noticed, of questions that didn't have easy answers. Why didn't she ever get sick? Why did she always show up seconds before something went wrong? Why did her English sound like it was lifted from a military manual? They didn't know her name, not really. Penelope Clove was what they called her, but it wasn't the name stitched onto the inside of the uniform she'd burned long ago. She was more ghost than woman, more memory than person, and she was tired of disappearing. Still, when Dr. Morrison called her into the office that afternoon, the calm in her step betrayed nothing. The folder on the desk wasn't a standard HR document. It was thick. Surveillance photos, log records, access card data. There was even a transcript. She recognized her own voice, recorded near the maintenance bay. Miss Clove, the man beside Morrison said with a slight Czech accent. I am Mr. Holub from security. We need to talk about your behavior. She studied him. Lean, professional, a predator, but not a hostile one, just someone who hunted truths for a living. His eyes flicked to her hands. He noticed how they stayed relaxed, yet ready. How her chair gave her a clear view of both exits. He wasn't just watching her. He was analyzing her. You've demonstrated patterns consistent with surveillance, he said. Behavioral indicators of industrial espionage. Do you deny this? She blinked once. I serve coffee. Morrison leaned forward, hesitant. No one's accusing you of anything, but we need clarity about your role, about your interests. Her breath sat still in her chest. She had run from this moment. For years, buried herself beneath polite smiles and janitorial duties. But now, they were trying to cage her into someone smaller, someone dimmer. They wanted her invisible. Even more than she already was. She signed the agreement. Surveillance, escort requirements, reporting protocols. She smiled, polite and patient. I understand. But inside, she knew something was shifting. Why did she walk into the emergency command center like she belonged there? Tuesday morning, clear skies, a test flight. Just another routine day at Northwind. Until it wasn't. The emergency alarms began without warning, sharp and sudden, slicing through morning routines like a blade. Outside, through the glass, she saw the trail of smoke across the sky. Falcon 7, Northwind's most advanced prototype aircraft, limping toward the ground. The radio cracked. Falcon 7 declaring emergency, hydraulic failure, attempting manual control, negative. Controls unresponsive. She moved to the window, her body, conditioned from years of combat missions and zero-hour decisions, read the smoke like a roadmap. There wasn't just a mechanical failure. There was a systems collapse, the kind that kills even the best pilots, and Falcon 7 wasn't carrying a rookie. Captain Jan Vorjak was Northwind's most experienced test pilot. He'd flown everything from drones to Mach-class interceptors. If he couldn't land this thing... She turned away from the window. Behind her, chaos, engineers shouting into radios, technicians scrambling, a nervous intern trying to push civilians out of the hall. And then she walked, quietly, steadily, toward the command center, the emergency. Command center was a hive of controlled panic. Dr. Vasquez stood at its center, headset clamped on, eyes on multiple screens. Fire teams were deploying, medical crews on standby, but no one. No one was talking about the override, because no one knew except her, Dr. Vasquez. She said softly, stepping into the room. The words dropped like a grenade. There's a manual override sequence. If we can establish radio contact, I can. Walk him through it. The room fell silent, Doctor. Vasquez turned, stared. So did Holub. So did the entire command team. Penelope, the woman who served their coffee, was speaking in classified terms, using precise system language as if she'd helped build the damn thing. You need to leave, Holub said sharply. This is a secure operation. But Vasquez hesitated, because deep down, she knew the truth. Something wasn't right. And something about this woman's voice, calm, cold, professional, cut through the chaos like a scalpel. You said there's an override? Vasquez asked. Penelope nodded. 3 systems, 1 sequence. We have 90 seconds before he drops below recovery altitude. She doesn't have clearance. Holub barked. Clearance won't matter if he's dead. She shot back. It was the first time she'd raised her voice in 15 years, Doctor. Vasquez stared, weighing rules against life, protocol against instinct. Then, in a voice that cut through, everything, she said, do it. What happened when the woman no one trusted picked up the mic? She moved to the console like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she had, just never here. Falcon 7. This is Northwind Emergency. Captain Vorjak, if you can hear me, key your mic twice. Static. Then 2 clicks. Good. Conscious. Listening. Captain, I'm going to talk you through a manual reversion. Your hydraulics are gone, but backup systems are still operable. We can restore basic control. She spoke quickly, efficiently. Each instruction a lifeline. Each system reset a heartbeat. On the screens, the flight path began to stabilize, and in the room, silence. She wasn't the coffee server anymore. She was the operator, the pilot, the ghost who finally stepped out of the shadow. Vorjak's voice cracked over the radio. Who is this? She hesitated. Just a second. Someone who knows your aircraft better than your engineers. Behind her, Holub was already on the radio reporting security violations, but no one interrupted her, because now she was the only chance they had. She guided Vorjak through power adjustments, fire suppression, single engine compensation. She coordinated emergency vehicle positions with silent hand signals. Her voice didn't shake once. 3 miles out. Begin descent to 1500. Watch the nose. You'll feel it drop. Feels heavy. That's normal. Trust it, Doctor. Vasquez stood beside her, pale. How do you know the manual control profile? Penelope didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just kept talking. Calm, focused, 1 mile, 500 feet. 200, 100. Then touchdown. The aircraft bounced once, stabilized, rolled, slowed, brakes. Engaged, Vorjak confirming shutdown. Applause erupted. Cheering. Relief. But Penelope? She sat still, because the landing was only the beginning. Behind her, Vasquez stepped forward. I need to know who you really are. She turned slowly, met her eyes. My name is Penelope Kozlov, she said, for the first time in 15 years, and the room went silent again. What do you say when the truth no longer fits inside a lie? She sat alone in the debriefing room, the adrenaline long since drained her hands. Once used to recalibrating night scopes and resetting fly-by-wire diagnostics in war zones, now lay. Still make it of gloves, rings, or rank. The questions hadn't started yet, but they would. It had been less than 90 minutes since Falcon 7 landed. Since she stepped out of the shadows and reminded herself, and everyone else, what she was capable of. Now, the silence was heavier than the jet doctor. Vasquez walked in first. No clipboard, no prepared statement. Just a long, measured look and a deep breath, like she was staring into a file marked classified, never to be opened. Penelope, she said quietly, we've run your name, your real name. Penelope didn't move. She didn't have to. The world had already moved for her. I've seen personnel files before, Vasquez continued. Pilots, operators, but nothing like yours. Croatian Special Forces, cross-trained with SEAL Team 6, experimental aircraft, confirmed live fire, classified operations with NATO that don't exist on paper. She paused. You were a ghost for 15 years. Penelope finally looked up. I wasn't hiding from the world, Doctor. I was hiding from myself. Vasquez sat across from her, not as a supervisor, not even as an interrogator, as a woman trying to make sense of another woman's impossible truth. Why here? Why stay? Penelope leaned back, because no one looks for war ghosts in break rooms, because after years of bullets, betrayals, and being told, my value ended with my kill count. I wanted something. Quieter. A long silence passed. Vasquez looked down. You know Holub wants you arrested. I know, Penelope said. But I also know he would have needed 6 body bags today if I hadn't acted. Another beat. Then Vasquez did something. Unexpected, she smiled, but just slightly. You're not what I expected. Penelope sighed. I never was. What does it feel like to walk through the ashes of your own lie? Word spread through Northwind like a fire in dry brush. The woman who cleaned the conference room was a combat pilot. The woman who remembered everyone's coffee orders used to drop into war zones at 2 a.m. under blackout conditions. The woman who didn't flinch when alarm screamed had once disarmed bombs while under sniper fire. And now the world saw her. Some avoided her, too awkward to speak. Some stared too long. Others whispered even more now than before, but none treated her like furniture anymore. She walked the halls like a revenant, same face, same eyes, same measured steps. But seen, for the first time in years, seen one morning, she found her locker labeled not staff break room, but restricted authorized personnel only. Inside it was a flight suit, and her name Lieutenant Colonel Penelope Kozlov stitched into the chest. She stared at it, hands trembling, not because she feared flying, not because she feared being asked to perform, but because a part of her, the part that wore anonymity like armor, was dying. Behind her, Doctor, Vasquez stepped in, holding a clipboard. They're offering you a chance, she said gently. Not punishment, not containment, a chance to fly again, officially, with us. Penelope turned. Why? Vasquez shrugged. Because your voice brought my best pilot home alive. Because my engineers have been studying your improvised emergency procedures for a week and still can't match them. And because, she added, we were blind. But we're not anymore. What happens when the wings you buried come back to life? 6 weeks after the emergency landing, she stood on the tarmac. Sun overhead, breeze gentle. The FA-18 Super Hornet in front of her like a slumbering beast. The same aircraft she had once flown deep into hostile airspace, dodging radar, launching. Precision strikes. Now it waited for her again, Marcus Chun. The engineer, who used to make light jokes over morning coffee, stood beside her with a stunned half-smile. "The Super Hornet is pre-flighted and ready," he said. "I have to admit, watching you step into that thing is like seeing a myth crawl out of a storybook." "It's just a plane," she said softly, strapping into her helmet. "Not the way you fly it," he replied. Behind her, Vasquez gave a final nod. "We've cleared your flight plan. This is just certification, simulated dogfights, stress testing, systems checks, standard." Penelope smiled inside her helmet. "I've seen worse." They all knew that was an understatement. Tower clearance came seconds later. Super Hornet 21. "You are cleared for takeoff. Welcome back to flying status." As the engines roared and the aircraft surged forward, Penelope felt the transition like muscle memory unfolding after long disuse, like breath after drowning, like truth after years of silence. She left the ground not just as a pilot, but as someone no longer hiding. How do you fly when you've spent years grounding yourself? The Super Hornet danced in the sky. Loop, barrel roll, dive, climb. She tested every surface, every system, pushed the limits not out of arrogance, but precision, mastery, love in the tower. Vasquez and the senior test engineers stared at the monitors. "She's executing maneuvers at 143% tighter radius than standard models." One of them said, "Did we know that aircraft could even do that?" Another whispered. Vasquez shook her head slowly. "No, we didn't." And in the cockpit, Penelope flew without flinching, her face calm, her hands exact, her mind clear. No more pretending, no more fading into corners. She wasn't the woman with a mop anymore. She was the woman with wings. How do you explain to people that your silence was survival? She stood at the glass window overlooking the runway, arms crossed, flight suit half unzipped. The Super Hornet sat in the distance, cooling under the weight of its own legacy. Smoke from the engines curled upward, barely visible in the summer air. Inside the control tower, no one spoke to her directly, but they looked. Always, now, they looked. Some with awe, some with discomfort, others with something harder to name regret. Maybe, for how they'd ignored her for so long, Captain Vorjak entered the observation deck, his gates still tight from recovery, but he walked like a man with questions. "You were the voice in my ear," he said. "No need for confirmation, weren't you?" She turned her head slowly, then nodded once. No apology, no pride, just quiet truth. Vorjak exhaled. "I kept thinking, whoever that was, they didn't sound afraid, not even a little." "I was," she said, "but not of the landing." He tilted his head. "Then what?" She looked back through the glass. Of what would come after? What changes when the ghosts stop hiding and start leading? 2 weeks passed. Her return to the air wasn't a headline, but within Northwind, it might as well have been a tectonic shift. The woman who once cleaned conference rooms was now rewriting the flight manuals, literally. Her technical feedback on the Super Hornet's control surfaces had already led to 2 redesign proposals. Her stress testing profiles revealed flaws in systems that had passed military certification. But her presence raised more than just technical standards. It raised questions, hard ones. If she could hide in plain sight for 15 years, what else, who else, had the system failed to see? She didn't enjoy the attention. She tolerated it. But in the conference room where she once served coffee, she now stood at the whiteboard, explaining high-G roll compensations, detailing engine fire contingencies, describing evasive maneuvers, developed in live combat maneuvers too classified to name but real enough to leave scars. Marcus Chum raised a hand. "Wait, you're saying we've been teaching test pilots to react after the warning lights?" She nodded. "In the time it takes a warning system to activate, a missile has already crossed half the distance. You train the body, not the instrument." "Doctor." Vasquez sat in the back, silent, watching. Not because she doubted, because she was learning. Why did she resist being seen, even after proving herself? Later that night, she walked alone through the hangar. The lights overhead buzzed gently, casting long shadows across the concrete. The place was empty, silent, and yet every footstep echoed like a gunshot. She passed the old break room, stopped. The same vending machine, the same hum of the fridge, the same table where engineers had gossiped and pilots had talked shop. Never once asking her name beyond a glance at her badge, Penelope stepped inside, looked at the coffee pot she had filled. Thousands of times, she touched it lightly with 2 fingers, and then she sat down, not to serve, just to sit. It had been years since she'd allowed herself stillness without purpose. Every second since leaving the SEALs had been calculated, an illusion maintained, a truth repressed. She used to believe peace was hiding. That anonymity was safety. Now she knew. Hiding had only dulled her, and peace? Peace had come the moment she told the truth. A voice echoed behind her. We're not used to heroes walking among us. It was Vasquez. Penelope didn't look up. I'm no hero. You saved a man's life. You saved a prototype worth hundreds of millions, and you saved our entire program from its own arrogance. Penelope exhaled. I just did what had to be done. Vasquez stepped into the light. You've done more than that. You've reminded us what it means to be something. Not just look like something. When they asked her to lead a new flight initiative, why did she hesitate? Weeks later, Vasquez called her into a private meeting. The air was heavier than usual thick, with the kind of responsibility you don't offer lightly. We're building a new flight initiative, she said. Something classified, high risk. We want you to lead it. Penelope didn't speak at first, just stared at the specs on the digital tablet. Long-range capabilities, stealth infrastructure, atmospheric maneuvering at Mach plus speeds. This is next-gen, she murmured. Vasquez nodded. This is beyond next-gen, and we need someone who's already been where the theory breaks. Penelope set the tablet down gently. You know what I am, she said. I do, Vasquez replied. Then you know what I've seen, what it cost. I do. And you still want me to fly into the fire again? Vasquez didn't flinch. No, I want you to lead others through it, because no one else understands the weight of survival like you do. The silence hung between them like an open door. I'll need a team, Penelope said at last. But not just the decorated ones. I want the overlooked, the underestimated. Vasquez smiled. You'll have them. What does redemption feel like when you never asked for it? That night, Penelope stood on the roof of the facility, watching stars rise over the Czech countryside. She thought of the men and women she'd lost, the friends buried under code names, the decisions that had blackened her dreams for years. She thought of the first time she fired a weapon, the first time she flew a jet through hostile airspace, the first time she gave a kill order, the first time she disobeyed one. She thought of all the moments that fractured her, and she realized something. She hadn't come back to the sky to prove anything. She'd come back to be whole. 15 years of hiding hadn't made her weak. It had made her patient. But now she was done waiting. What do you tell a team that doesn't yet know they've been chosen for a war they can't see? The briefing room was sterile, white and humming with quiet uncertainty. 12 people sat around the table, some in Northwind uniforms, others in civilian gear, none of them knowing why they had been summoned. A programmer who'd built predictive drone behavior models, a maintenance tech who ran simulations on emergency ejection algorithms, a junior analyst who had memorized every incident report the military had ever declassified, and some it hadn't, an aircraft handler with a background in freediving, a systems engineer who once repaired a guidance system mid-flight without permission, and 5 others like them, the misfits, the forgotten, the ones who didn't look the part. And at the front of the room stood the woman who used to serve them coffee. Penelope didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch just long enough. Then, finally, You've all been selected for Initiative Vector. Murmurs, she continued. Vector is not a project. It's a test, not of machines, but of people, of how far we can go when we stop defining potential by resumed titles. Someone near the back raised a hand. Are we flying something? Penelope's eyes didn't waver. No, not yet. First, you're going to build it, then you're going to survive it. That quieted the room, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, I don't believe in command by rank. I believe in command by readiness, and I chose you because you've already been overlooked, like I was, and I know what it's like to carry more than your uniform says you should. The room stayed silent, but their eyes said what their mouths could not. They were in. Why was she so afraid of dreaming again? In the darkness of her quarters, Penelope sat at her desk, staring at the old patch she once pulled from her tactical vest before burning her kit. It was faded now, edges singed, the seal trident still visible, but barely. She kept it hidden for years, folded into the lining of an old duffel bag, a memento of everything she'd left behind. She didn't miss war, not the blood, not the orders, but she missed something deeper, the meaning. The feeling of knowing what her presence was worth in a room, of stepping into a space and being the solution before the question even finished forming. Now, even with Vector under her command, the doubt lingered, the kind that came from years of suppression, from years of folding herself smaller, the kind that said, maybe they'll still strip this from you. Maybe you'll still be told you don't belong. She ran her fingers over the patch, then slipped it into the drawer again. Not because she was ashamed, but because now she didn't need a symbol to remind her of who she was. She was becoming that woman again, on her own terms. What do you do when you're trusted with more than you ever asked for? 2 weeks into Vector's launch phase, Penelope sat beside Dr. Vasquez in a secure development hangar. On the tarmac stood a new bird-sleek, angular, matte black, a next-gen hybrid interceptor not even listed in NATO's black budget projects. It wasn't just fast. It was clever, capable of autonomous assistance, edge AI interface, field-adaptable wings, but it lacked one thing, a soul to fly it. This is your project now, Vasquez said. They approved the transfer. Command wants to see what happens when you push it. Penelope stared at the plane. Something inside her flickered. Not fear, not awe, something else. Possibility. You want me to fly her? No, Vasquez said. We want you to make her mean something. Why did a late-night phone call shake her more than combat ever did? It was past midnight when her secure comm line rang. Penelope sat up in bed, bare feet hitting cold tile. She answered without hesitation. Kozlov. The voice on the other end was clipped. American, high-level military clearance. We have an incident. She closed her eyes. Of course. Details, she said. Satellite signature confirms loss of a NATO surveillance craft near the Syrian border. No distress call, no wreckage, but we received a 6-second transmission with your name in it. She froze. My name? Yes, in Croatian, encrypted in a legacy cipher last used by SEAL Team 6. Your old unit, the silence stretched. You think it's a setup. We think someone's trying to get your attention, and we think they knew where you were. Penelope's voice dropped an octave. Give me the full package, raw data, coordinates, satellite sweeps. You're not cleared for. I don't care, she cut in. Send it. The call ended. Her hands trembled, not because of fear, but because the past wasn't done with her. And someone somewhere was reaching through fire and distance. To pull her back in, what would she sacrifice to protect the life she had just rebuilt? The next morning, she stood alone in Hangar 4, eyes fixed on the prototype. The team she'd chosen, the ones no one else had trusted, were just outside, calibrating systems, testing stress responses. They had no idea what had been whispered. Through that call, she could leave. Tell Vasquez, trigger the red tape, let bureaucracy smother the signal, or she could act. She pulled up the encrypted transmission on her device, decoded the signature. A name appeared, one she hadn't heard since the war. Not a target, not a commander, a teammate. Someone she'd watched die on a mission no one ever admitted happened, but the name was there, clear, alive. What do you do when your name is on a list you never agreed to join? Penelope sat at the makeshift table, the datapad glowing faintly between them, the facility on the screen. She recognized the layout, not from her current post, but from years ago, long before her time at Northwind. It had been a ghost site then. Off books, black-funded, running under a NATO-adjacent project nobody dared trace. Only now it wasn't a skeleton, it was a hub. An operational site with active hangars, heat signatures, and what looked like aircraft design that mirrored the prototype she'd just flown back in Prague. What is this? She whispered. Andre tapped the corner of the screen. They took your flight profile, your systems research, your override protocols, all the upgrades you tested under Vector, and ported them into this. She stared, chilled. That's not possible. Northwind is compromised, Andre interrupted. Has been for a while. Some of your telemetry's been copied, filtered through third-tier shell contractors. You didn't just save that prototype. You demonstrated. A system people want. And fear. Penelope stood up, the walls suddenly too tight around her. So now I'm a threat? He nodded slowly. A liability. Too much training. Too much truth. You're the only pilot who could see how deep this goes, and the only one capable of stopping it. She exhaled, which is exactly why they want me gone. How do you prepare to fight a war you never declared? The flight back to Europe was tense. Penelope had erased the digital trace of her landing. She flew dark, low, fast. When she arrived at Northwind's airfield, the reception was different. No applause, no debrief. Just silence. She was back early. Too early, she taxied the FA-18 into the hangar, powered down, and stepped out into a wall of tension so thick it scraped her skin. Waiting for her was Holub security director, suspicious since day one, clipboard in hand, eyes narrow. You left without clearance, he said flatly. I submitted an emergency leave, she replied. You took a combat-ready aircraft into foreign airspace. I returned it. He stepped closer. You accessed restricted comms. Military-grade encryption. Where were you, Kozlov? She didn't answer. He didn't need her to, because behind him, two plainclothes agents stepped into view. Doctor, Vasquez would like to speak with you, Holub said. Now, why did the only person she trusted start asking the wrong questions? Vasquez sat at the far end of the conference table, hands folded, jaw tight. Penelope, she said, with less warmth than usual, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Penelope sat down across from her, the silence thickening. Did you leave Northwind to rendezvous with someone from your past? A beat. Yes, Penelope replied. Did that person give you data? Yes. Did you bring it back here? Penelope paused, then. No. Technically true. She had uploaded it to a satellite drop node, scrubbed it from her gear before returning. Vasquez leaned back, her eyes searching. You understand how this looks. Penelope nodded. I also understand what happens when people are erased for knowing too much. I saw a name, mine, on a kill list. Vasquez exhaled sharply. You realize how paranoid that sounds. I do, but paranoia is just pattern recognition, trained in the crucible of betrayal. Silence. Then Vasquez said softly, I want to believe you. God help me, I do. But HQ is already whispering about you, about your flight hours, your past. They're asking whether we ever really knew who we let walk into our hangars. You did, Penelope said. You just didn't listen until I started speaking in emergency codes. What happens when the system turns on its own savior? By nightfall, Holub had suspended her flight access. Temporary internal investigation, he said, until we sort this out. She wasn't escorted out yet, but everywhere she walked, she was shadowed. The break room? Empty. The simulator. Bay? Locked. The hangar where the Vector prototype sat? Now guarded, she had gone from a ghost to a hero. And now to something worse than either, a threat. She stood alone on the catwalk above Hangar 7, watching as her team, the one she had handpicked, went through flight drills under someone else's supervision. It hurt. Not the exclusion. The betrayal. She had given them everything. Her skills, her story, her soul. And still, they were afraid of her, because people don't fear what they don't understand. They fear what reminds them of what they're not. And Penelope Kozlov was something they didn't have a box for. Why didn't she run, even when the doors started closing? 2 days later, she was ordered to report to an off-site facility for debriefing. A black van arrived at dawn. No markings, 2 handlers, no conversation. She got in without resisting. She knew what came next. The glass rooms, the questions with no right answers, the slow erasure of record and relevance. But as the van pulled away from the base, something in her shifted. She wasn't going to fade again. She wasn't going to fold into silence just because the truth made people uncomfortable. She didn't survive 15 years in the shadows just to be quietly deleted. And somewhere, above it all, someone was watching. Inside Northwind's surveillance suite, a red light blinked. One of the junior techs leaned forward. "Sir, telemetry anomaly in Hangar 4. Prototype vector system just pinned internal comms unauthorized." "Login?" Holub looked up. "Kozlov?" "No, sir. She's off base." "Then who?" The screen blinked once more. A message flashed. One line, "She was right," and the lockdown began. What happens when the system you served turns into the enemy you didn't see coming? They moved her to a black site facility hidden deep within the Bavarian Alps. Snow-capped peaks above, reinforced concrete and steel below. No signs, no uniforms, just sterilized floors and silence. Penelope sat in a cold chair inside a metal box masquerading as a room. No windows, no clock, just the sound of her own heartbeat and footsteps. They came in waves, men with clipboards and fake smiles, women with warm voices and eyes that never blinked. Security operatives who asked the same questions again and again. Did you knowingly violate mission protocol? Are you working with foreign intelligence? Do you deny receiving off-channel communication from a presumed dead operative? Are you aware that classified technology was illegally duplicated during your last mission? She answered each question the same way, truthfully, calmly, with clarity. But the more truth she gave, the more they recoiled. They weren't after answers. They were after doubt. And Penelope Kozlov had become inconvenient proof of something they couldn't control. Why do institutions fear those who remember? Too much. After 4 days of silence and questions, they offered her a deal. Resign quietly. Walk away. We'll restore your record, redact your anomalies, and return you to civilian life. She looked at the man across the table. His suit was clean, his hands were soft. His breath smelled like mint and money. "You think I care about a record?" she said, voice low. He didn't flinch, just tapped the folder beside him. "We're giving you an out, Kozlov. This could all go away." She leaned forward. "You're not afraid of what I did. You're afraid of what I know, of what I might expose. You built something off the back of my training logs, my flight techniques, my override algorithms, and you didn't think I'd notice." The man closed the folder. "You're a liability," Penelope stood. "No, I'm the reason you still have a working prototype and a living pilot. But if you're going to treat me like a weapon, don't be surprised when I choose my own target. What happens when suppressed truth finds a voice it can't silence?" That night, in the isolation of her cell, Penelope stared at the small camera embedded in the wall. The red light blinked, silent, steady, watching. She sat up and spoke clearly. "Everything you're trying to hide, it's already out. You should know that my flight telemetry, the encrypted kill list, The black site coordinates. The tech transfer documentation. It's no longer mine. I gave it to someone who doesn't ask for permission. She smiled. Just a little. And if I disappear, every file goes wide. She wasn't bluffing. Before her extraction, she had met with Andre one final time. She handed off a data key air-gapped, untraceable, and burned the second copy. He had promised to wait until either she was safe or erased, and Andre Malik kept his promises. Why did the people watching her suddenly panic? Back at Northwind, red lights flashed in the secure network room. A ghost login had surfaced encrypted, routed through former satellite addresses that hadn't pinged in years. On the screen, a message. You built a machine without a conscience. She was your conscience. Then the second part. You erased her. She won't erase you. Security scrambled. Holub was called out of bed. Engineers locked out of systems they had designed. In the lab, the prototype aircraft vector flashed into autonomous mode for the first time without command input. It wasn't flying. It was listening, and in that silence, systems aligned with a recorded voice print. Penelope's. What happens when the aircraft she taught to survive chooses to fight for her? Across the continent, under cover of night, Vector launched. No tower approval. No radar trail, no broadcast ID. A whisper through the sky. Its systems were partially autonomous, but Penelope's overrides had always included one failsafe, a locked response protocol, triggered by an untraceable phrase only she could authorize, and that phrase had been spoken in her cell, just 6 words, picked up by a listening microphone, hidden in the folds of a larger conversation. The sky still answers to me. The aircraft obeyed, and the world, once again, remembered who she was. Why did the interrogators vanish before sunrise? At 5:42 a.m., Penelope's door opened. No words, no cuffs, just silence. 2 security agents led her down an empty hallway. The base was abandoned. No staff, no operatives, no suits with sharp tongues. As if the building itself had been evacuated, she was led outside into the cold morning air. There it was. Vector, waiting on a makeshift landing strip. Engines idling, cockpit open. She turned to the agents. You're letting me go? One of them looked away. The other simply said, We weren't told to stop you. What did freedom feel like after 15 years of silence, 4 days of interrogation, and one flight that changed everything? Penelope climbed into the cockpit. Her hands knew the controls like breath. She didn't ask for clearance, didn't need validation. She had taught this aircraft how to survive the worst-case scenario. Now it had returned the favor. As the engines roared to life and the horizon lit with the first light of dawn, she felt something rise in her chest. Not anger, not fear, resolve. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation of her truth, her name, her sky. She lifted off without looking back. Let the silence explain everything she no longer needed to say. What do you become after the world's tried to erase you, and you survive anyway? The sky opened like a promise. Penelope climbed above the clouds, higher than protocols, higher than questions. The cockpit around her pulsed with quiet power familiar. Obedient, hers. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was returning to something she had buried beneath years of compromise. Behind quiet smiles and measured footsteps, the woman in this aircraft wasn't the ghost they had overlooked. She was the reckoning they never saw coming. Below her, Europe rolled out in silence. Snow-capped ridges, sleeping cities, unknowing lives, and somewhere beneath it all, the tangled network of operations that had tried to silence her. But you can't kill what doesn't need permission to exist. And you can't erase someone who's finally willing to be seen. Where do you go when nowhere is safe? But you no longer need safety. The next 24 hours unfolded like controlled chaos. Encrypted messages moved through shadow networks. Her team at Northwind, though she had trained, trusted, believed in received untraceable data packets containing the full truth. Flight logs, data thefts, the kill list, the black site specs, and Andre? He moved too, whispered files into foreign hands, lit slow fuses, kept his promise. Penelope didn't need to attack. All she needed to do was reveal, because light does what bullets can't. It exposes. By the time the second day ended, calls were being made, political ones, military ones, legal ones, the kind of conversations that only happen when someone untouchable makes a mistake so large it spills into daylight, and that someone had underestimated her. Why did she return to the place that once tried to forget her? 3 days after her escape, she landed the Vector prototype on Northwind's tarmac under full daylight. No authorization, no clearance, just purpose. The hangar? Doors open like a held breath. Engineers, test pilots, guards, they all stopped, watched. She didn't need an escort, didn't need permission. She climbed out of the cockpit in her flight suit, walked past security like a storm given human form, and entered the command building alone. Inside, Dr. Vasquez stood waiting. No guards, no clipboard, just eyes that had seen too much too fast. "You came back," Vasquez said quietly. "I never left," Penelope replied. "Only waited." "For what?" Penelope looked past her, to the glass, the hangars, the teams that had once whispered about the strange woman who never called in sick. For the right moment to stop hiding. What happens when the system that feared you starts to need you again? By the end of the week, the investigation turned inward. Holub was reassigned. Quietly, without fanfare, internal audits were launched. External agencies called. Northwind was no longer in control of its own secrets, and the woman they tried to suppress was offered command, not of a flight group, of an entire program. Vector was your blueprint. Vasquez told her in the conference room where it all began. "We can't deny it anymore. It doesn't work without you. It never did." Penelope stood in the same spot where she'd once poured coffee, listened to jokes, smiled politely. Now, the same voices waited for her orders. It felt like irony, but it also felt earned. What did she do with power she never wanted, but finally deserved? She didn't use it for revenge. She used it for reform. She rewrote recruitment procedures, broke down outdated chain-of-command models, created a training division built not around pedigree but potential. She gave voice to the ones like her, the overlooked, the underestimated, and in doing so, she reshaped Northwind into what it should have been all along, not a fortress of egos and credentials, but a crucible for capability. And in the flight log of Vector, the first successful entry bore one name, LT. Call, Penelope Kozlov, Flight Commander, Operator, Survivor. What does freedom look like when you've paid for it in silence? One morning, she stood at the edge of the same hangar she'd walked into for 15 years unnoticed. Now, she wore her name openly. Her face was still quiet, still calm, but her eyes had stopped asking for permission. She watched the next generation climb into the prototype, young, hungry, capable. She had trained them herself. Behind her, Marcus Chun joined her on the catwalk. "Funny," he said. "We used to joke that you were some kind of ghost." "I was," she said without smiling. "Now I'm something else." "And what's that?" She looked toward the sky, prepared. What remains when the lies fall away and the woman remains? Not medals, not headlines, not revenge. Just a legacy. One born in silence, forged in shadows, and revealed in flight. The woman who once served coffee in the break room now flew the aircraft she helped design, commanded the program she had saved, and mentored pilots who would never doubt the power of someone underestimated. They had tried to erase her instead. She became undeniable, and maybe that's the quiet truth of strength. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.